Road Wedding Pro. Welcome back. Okay, so today I'm actually going to share some information with you that I think you'll find very helpful. I recently was having a conversation with a friend who has a friend who got married recently at a location here that I actually happen to be part of and did not know this particular bride personally at that time. And so we were all together and we were just happened to be chatting, and she gave me some information about her particular wedding day. And so in talks with her, I asked if she'd be willing to let me use her particular wedding contract as an example to show you just what it is that you should look for in a contract, what's standard, what might be some things that you might want to question or just be on the lookout for, and know prior to signing that contract. Because in my talks with her, there were some things that she wasn't told initially and found out later. Now, mind you, she had a wonderful wedding day. She was very happy with everything. There were just little caveats that she just wished that were more upfront and forthcoming at the time, because they had to work around some certain things to make it happen. She also shared with me like the pricing on what she had, and it was more than they initially anticipated. It wasn't that it was an issue for them. It was just more than what they were presented at their initial tour of the venue. And of course, those things were not figured out until much later in the process. As you are booking your venue, you're not planning everything that day. You were initially just reserving the venue, and then months down the road, you start making your plans. And so at that point, there were a lot of things that ended up getting added to her bill that were not initially planned for. And so she wanted those things. So the costs of those were higher than expected. And so I'll get into that. But it was very helpful to kind of see, and this is a venue I work with on a regular basis. And so it was just kind of helpful to kind of see and really fully understand all the line items that were unaccounted for initially, and then how it all totaled out at the end and where it all landed for her. So again, she was very happy with her wedding day. It wasn't anything that was super wrong or negative. It was just surprising to her. And again, because she is a bride who's never planned a wedding before, lots of unknown things that she discovered throughout the process. Just to reiterate what I have to say when it comes to the whole planning process and why education is so necessary prior to starting things. There were things she wished she knew ahead of time, things she found out during, things she found out after. And so like I said, my discussion with her, she was still happy with everything. It was just a learning process, and she thought that what I'm doing is very helpful for brides. Unfortunately for her, she's already done, but she thought by giving me this information, it would allow me to share with you so you can see exactly what I'm trying to teach. So we'll get started. I am not going to share the name of the venue just for the venue's sake. There was nothing that they did wrong on their part at all. It was just simply, this was how they did things. This is how she perceived things. And at the end of the day, this is what it is. And I'm not sharing her name again, because she was nice enough to allow me to use this as an example to share with others. And again, she was very happy with her wedding day. I just want to share real life, real wedding that just recently took place so you can see for yourself.
All right, so here we are. I decided to go ahead and just put a spreadsheet together versus showing you the actual bill, only because it was multiple pages and it was hard to see all the totals on there and also keep both the venue and this bride's information private. So what I did was I just took everything from the bill and popped it into this spreadsheet so you can see everything in one place. Um, This particular bride had 246 guests at her wedding. Uh, on the first column here, I've decided I went ahead and just put her actual bill. On this column here, I actually reduced the count down to 140 people to be more in line with the averages, just for comparison purposes, for people who want to see what the same wedding would look like with less people. So I went ahead and did both, but we're going to mainly talk about this actual bill here. And then at the bottom, we'll see the difference in cost by reducing the account. So we're going to start off. This bride actually got married in a church. So her wedding was not on site. So she did not have any fees when it came to the ceremony, which they do charge separate for. The venue rental is included in their per person rate, so that is not separated out. This was a plated meal. She served a filet Oscar as one meal option and a chicken and shrimp option as well. So that those two options are right here. If we take a look, the plated meal cost was $160 per person. That does include their premium bar package. So it includes beer, wine, and then premium liquor. At 246 guests, we're looking at $39,360 as the base. Now, on her particular invoice, she opted to increase the size of the filet, which was a $3 upcharge per person, and that particular meal, there was 189 guests that had the filet option. So she was billed $3 per person for those 189 guests for an additional cost of $567. So going down, let's see here. It looks like there were 52 meals when it came to the chicken, and there was no additional charge for any of those chicken dishes. She did have 8 vendors that were not included in the guest count and was charged $52.25 per each one of those vendors for an additional charge of $418. They do have a tasting for their couples to be able to come in and taste the food after they're booked. They were charged $25 per person for 2 additional people on top of the ones that were included with their package. So they do allow the bride and groom, but additional guests to come in and taste are additional charge. So that was added to her bill as well. Okay, so down here under the place settings and linens, so her standard china, flatware, glassware, and linens were all included in the package. However, she opted to do a upgrade on some rental items. She chose a gold flatware pattern and some gold rimmed glassware as her upgrades, and that was an additional cost. For 264 people, she was billed $29.64. Her head table, she had some specialty linens, again, an upcharge of $246. Her linens for her place card table was an additional charge of $20. She opted to rent some chargers that the venue had in-house at 75 cents each, and that was $183.75. This piece right here is pretty important because this happens a lot when you get an all-inclusive package and you're not aware of this going into your planning process. So in the all-inclusive packages, most of those venues have tables of 10, seating of 10, which is a 72-inch round table, and they account for 10 guests at each table. So if you're a bride and your wedding is 150 guests, you're going to get 15 tables included in your package. What most people don't realize is that when you go to do your seating chart, 10 people per table does not always perfectly work out. especially in a situation where you have possibly a family coming and you have an odd number of people, or if you have a guest coming who is a single and does not have a significant other attending with them, and you have an odd amount of people and don't have the ability to place a full 10 at the table. And so you either need to reduce down to 9 or you have an extra person somewhere. So potentially you could squeeze another person into that table. It just is something to be aware of, because if you are doing your table assignments and you just have a weird dynamic of trying to figure out, you've got a table of 8 over here and you don't really have 2 more people that you feel like you could fit with that table of 8. Then you've got these 2 people that you're trying to put at another table. It's just one of those situations that arises often. And so if you find yourself needing to add an additional table in order to accommodate your seating arrangements, there is additional charge for that. In this scenario, it's $150 per additional table that's being added, and she needed to add 2 tables to her order. So she had an added charge of $300 to her table layout. So that's something to keep in mind when you are working in a venue that's all inclusive and there's a per person rate and everything is factored on a certain amount of people per table. One thing I should note on this that I did notice is that her standard package of $160 per person includes the china, the flatware, and the glassware, as well as the tables. This bride chose a upgraded gold flatware and an upgraded gold rim glass. There was no credit given to her for not using the provided rentals that is normally provided with the venue. So she basically paid even on top of what she was already paying for, because those things are factored into the cost. She paid an additional charge on top of that and was not given any credit back for not using their standard glassware, their standard flatware. And so that is a little bit interesting, and I'm not sure if she didn't ask for that or it just is their policy not to give a credit on things not used that are included. Okay, so moving down here to the bar. The bar section, all of the beer and wine are included. They do charge separately for White Claws. So White Claws were charged by the case, and they had 10 cases for an additional charge of $250. So the champagne toast in this particular package that she chose was already included. So the champagne toast was champagne for each guest, poured and placed on the tables. This bride chose a champagne tower in addition to that for an additional charge of $395. Miller Lite is not part of their beer package. They have Bud Light as their beer of choice, and so this particular bride wanted the Miller Lite option, and so that was an additional charge of $50 per case and 3 cases. Let's see, down further we have the cocktail hour. This bride had so many guests that she needed 2 locations for cocktail hour to take place. So she had both an outside option on the patio as well as an indoor option in the lobby. They charge an additional fee of $525 for each bar setup. Now, in this particular scenario, they did give her a credit and only charged her for one of the bar setups because her count was so high. So she did have 2 cocktail bar setups, but only was charged for one. The additional hour of bar. So this particular venue charges or gives you 4.5 hours of bar service, and your reception is a 5-hour reception period. She opted for an additional hour of bar service and was charged $1,050 for that additional hour. She did have 4 cocktail tables for cocktail hour, which were $20 each for an additional charge of $80. Moving down, this right here is a lot of added items that this bride selected to include for her wedding. So floral centerpieces are provided through their in-house floral business. They are only provided for the guest tables. So they're accounting for, again, that number of guests, which was 246, divided by 10 people. So she would get only that amount of flowers. So it does not include anything for the ceremony, does not include anything for the bride or the bridal party, and it does not include anything for your head table. So that piece was covered. Her DJ also comes standard with the venue. She did add cold sparks to her package, which, if you don't know what cold sparks are, those are little machines that shoot up fireworks that are inside, and they're called cold sparks because they're a different technology than your traditional fireworks. So it gives the firework look, but it's lower and it's contained and it's cold to the touch. So she chose to add those. One is $150 and she had 2. Her cake is included with the venue. Again, it's something they offer in-house, and so that was part of her package. Additionally, she opted for a special effects package for her dancing, which was a dry ice effect, which was an additional $420. A lighting package for an additional $695, and she opted for a sweetheart table and upgraded chairs for an additional cost of $1,016, a photo booth that they offer in-house for $237, and lawn games that they offer from the venue for an additional cost of $250. So over and above the options that were included in her venue, as far as those decor, DJ, and cake things were concerned, there was an additional almost $3,000 in charges. That's quite a bit of additional charges, but she wanted them and they had the budget to do it. But again, it was not something that was included in the venue, so the initial cost of the venue was significantly lower. So moving down, as you can see, the subtotal here of all of the food and then the additional items that she added on comes to $49,477. So if you scroll back up and look, the original price for the food here is $39,360. Again, we added on $567 for the larger fillet. We added vendor meals in here. So that brought that subtotal to $40,000. So when you take the $40,000, it seems not so bad. However, when you start adding in all these additional upgraded charges, which is $3,700, and then you go down and add the cocktail hour and the White Claws and the extra beer, another $2,400, and then again, you're down here adding upgrades with your lighting effects and whatnot there, so another $3,000. Okay, so when we scroll down here to the bottom, you can see that we originally started out with $40,000 in the food and beverage before we added on any of the upgrades, any of the, the extra things that we were discussing previously. So we've added $9,000 in additional charges over and above what we originally started out at. So with 246 people, that's $201 per person. Now, starting at $160 per person, that's not so bad when you factor in all those additional things that were added to the package. So you're talking about an additional $40 per person to get all those extras. But again, you're only accounting for this particular bill. You're not accounting for all the other pieces and parts that go into your wedding. So this is something to be mindful of as we scroll down here. So looking down below, you can see that the subtotal of $49,000 is here. Now, there's a service fee. The service fee at this particular venue is 20%. The thing to know about this particular service fee is that it is on every single thing that's on your bill. It's not just on the food and beverage piece of it, it's on the entire bill. So all those upgrades, all those selections, all those things that this bride added to her package now is being charged an additional 20% service fee. So we already added $9,000 from where we originally started, and now when you take that $49,000 and you add 20% service fee to that, we're adding almost 10,000 more dollars, 98.95. That's a whole heck of a lot of money to be adding that you probably weren't factoring in to your original budget, but it's also a whole heck of a lot of money that you could do other things with. So that piece to me is super important when you're looking at all the comparable venues and the pricing structures that each one has. This $9,800 could go to good use on a whole lot of other things for your wedding. So again, something to be mindful of when you are venue comparing. So this venue also, this is I have not figured this out yet. In Ohio, all items get charged sales tax with the exception of food that is being taken out. When I mean taken out, like if you go to a restaurant and pick up food and take it to go, that is the only exception to when uh, food is not taxed. So if you were to sit in the restaurant and eat, your food would be taxed. If you go to a grocery store, food is not taxed. So in this scenario, they should be taxing sales tax on the entire bill because essentially all the goods and services that they're providing would be considered something that sales tax would be charged on. Food in this scenario should be getting charged tax because the guests are sitting and eating at their venue and they're not taking their food to go. So when you figure that out, this number right here is not making any sense to me, but that's what's on their bill. I don't know what they're basing that off of. I'm not really sure if it's an error or what. However, this number here should be it should be 7.5% in the state of Ohio and the county that we're in because it's county and state tax combined. So the sales tax for this particular venue should have been 7.5%. And the 7.5% should be charged on this $49,000 plus the $98,000 combined, which is a significant amount of money. So I do not know, again, why this number is so low, because it certainly should be higher. Now, also below, which is also something I can't really figure out, they separated the beverage tax and the floral tax. So they put $34 times 256 people, which does total this amount right here, the 8364, and this does add up correctly. The $624.75 is the 7.5% of this amount. So that line item is correct. I'm assuming that they are charging $34 per person in their alcohol, so they separated that amount for whatever reason from their per person rate of $160. I don't know why they would do that because again, all of the items in that $160 per person rate should have been taxed at the full amount. So not sure, but again, this number is correct. This number I have yet to figure out. Below, they have something called a floral tax. I put this in here exactly how it appeared on their invoice. I have yet to figure out what this all means, but it's $110 at this hour. It doesn't really matter because it's the lowest number on the entire bill. So I don't know what that means or how they do it, but that is what they had there. They also gave her a discount of $150 for whatever reason. So at the end of the day, the most important thing to look at here is this number. This number started, if you recall, at $39,000. And now here we are adding $20,000 more to that bill. Now again, 10,000 of it was in added upgrades, and then the other nearly $10,000 was in the service fees. So it's a lot to go from 39,000 to 60,000. It's probably something you weren't budgeting or accounting for. And so when you do the math on that and the per person rate for that, you will see here that that comes out to $245 per person for everything. So something to keep in mind for sure, but it's good for you to be able to see an actual bill in 2023's pricing. Now keep in mind that this particular venue has since raised their prices since this bride signed her contract. She was originally signed in 2021. Her wedding didn't take place until 2023. So the 2021 saga of all the COVID stuff that was going on in the wedding industry, pricing, it was just a mess. So she definitely got rates that were a lot lower than they were if she had waited and booked when all the pricing increases and everything were going on. So now this same venue charges 22% for their service fee versus 20. So that number right there of $9,895 would be even higher than it is today. So, and a couple other things have now changed as well, but that's neither here nor there. The important thing is that you can see an actual bill and have something to compare and something to think about when you are contemplating your venue, because again, a lot of these things in here are added things that they didn't necessarily know about at the time of booking and then made the decision to go ahead with. Again, like the extra size of the filet. I'm sure the vendor meals were probably not something that they thought of. And, you know, all these extras that we discussed as far as upgrades on rental items and whatnot are concerned. So hopping real quick over to this other column that I put together, I just wanted to pop in a scenario for you to see if every single thing stayed exactly the same as far as selections are concerned, all the upgrades that she made and all of that, but our guest count was reduced. I just want to show you what that would look like. So I took the $160 per person and with 246 people, and I reduced that count down to 140. So basically took a whole 100 people off of that order, and that brought that total down to 22.4 when it comes to the food cost. So I again left the 189 guests with their upgraded steak and kept everything else identical except for when you get down here to the increase of the upgrades of the gold flatware and whatnot. So I just took this number here, divided it out by her guest count that she had, and then took that per person amount and did the math over here to get an equal rate. So it dropped down, but we're still looking at some pretty high amounts here. So at the end of the day, we'll just scroll down to the bottom because everything else is staying the same. And we are looking at the final total. So by reducing the guest count down to 140 versus 246, we went from $49,000 down to $31,000. Now her per person rate is higher, and the reason for that is because all the upgrades, all the added things like the lighting packages, the photo booth, all that stuff remained on there. So when you have those fixed costs, you're not able to reduce the same way if you were taking those off. So her service fees, again, at 20% on that amount are a little bit lower, but they're still 20% of her total. So again, $6,200 versus $9,800, still a significant amount and still something that can be applied to other things in your wedding planning. I didn't even mess with the tax here because, again, I couldn't figure out what this situation was. So we just left that as is. And then we did fix the tax here. So that lowered that down $300. And then, again, I didn't mess with this, not knowing what it was. So at the end of the day, we went from $60,000 down to $38,000 with a guest count of 246 to a guest count of 140. So as you can see, one of the easiest things to do to reduce costs when it comes to your wedding is reduce your guest count. That is a huge factor when it comes to what your overall budget looks like. There's obviously fixed costs, and no matter how many people you have, that's how much things are going to cost, like a photographer, like a DJ, like certain things like that. Those costs are fixed. It doesn't matter how many guests you have. But once you get into food and beverage, those numbers are really driven by how many people you invite to your wedding and have as guests. So keep that in mind if you're trying to keep your budget reduced, because it's not just the food and beverage, it's how many tables do you need, how many tablecloths do you need on them, how many plates, how many cups, how many pieces of flatware, how many napkins, how many centerpieces. All those things factor into your guest count. So keep that in mind and try to reduce those numbers when you are trying to reduce your budget. So this is going to be all as far as the spreadsheet is concerned. I'm going to hop over to the contract piece of it now, where everything that the bride signed was spelled out in her contract.
So I have a printed copy here of the contract for this particular wedding. I did go ahead and just print out a paper copy of the actual contract piece of it, spelling out all the terms that are set forth in the contract. I did that because the format that she sent it to me in was there was no good way to prevent the privacy of the venue and the bride herself. So I decided just to go ahead and print a printed copy and black out the information that pertained to those items. I did make some notes on here and highlighted in pink because those are things I wanted to kind of stress and point out. Those are the things you should be looking at when you're reviewing the contracts in front of you. It's not necessarily anything out of the ordinary. It's just important things that you need to note and be aware of so that when you are making your plans over the months that you are in the process, that you keep these things in mind as guidelines and rules that you need to be aware of so that on your wedding day, you know what the expectations are. Oftentimes I hear a lot of brides who have all these grandiose plans of doing their own setups and having all their bridesmaids come in and help and do things of that nature. And without consulting their contract, where it's typically spelled out on what time they can get in the building, or even asking the person at the venue, they go ahead and make these plans and then find out right before, usually at their final meetings with the venue, that their start time is much later than they anticipated, and now they're scrambling to try to come up with a backup plan for setup. Generally, the contracts are going to spell out your time for start and what time you need to be out of the building at the end of the night. I just went ahead and highlighted things so that I could breeze through the contract and not have to read everything to you word for word. It is important, I have stressed this so many times, to read thoroughly through the contract and make sure you understand everything that it's telling you. Don't assume anything. If you question anything or don't understand something, definitely have a conversation with that venue person prior to signing your contract, because not understanding something could really get you in some hot water if you perceive it one way and it is not that way later on. So I'm going to read through those highlighted items that I made notes on. And those are things I'm going to tell you just to be on the lookout for when you're reading through contracts. In this particular contract, for this venue, if the client decides to cancel the contract for any reason, all money that has been paid at that time belongs to the venue. So there's no refunds at that point, which is pretty typical. But again, something that a lot of people just don't understand, and they think if they cancel that they're just losing their deposit. The reality is you're losing any money that you've put down. Many venues offer payment plans, and this venue does offer a payment plan each month. So what they do is they take your total estimated bill, because it can't be exact until the final, but they take the estimated bill and they break that up depending on the amount of months that you have between the time you sign the contract and the date of your wedding, and they'll break those monthly payments up for you. In this particular contract at this venue, they do have a clause that states that if you make a payment past 21 days of your scheduled payment, that they have the right to cancel the event, and then again, all monies would belong to them. Another thing spelled out in this contract is their minimum requirements. This particular venue is based on a guest count minimum versus a food and beverage minimum. They do have different minimums for different days of the week. Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays are spelled out. This particular bride got married on a Saturday. It is important to note that in this particular contract, they do separate guest count by adults versus kids. So there is no minimum on kids, but it is 140 adult minimum requirement. So if you are not paying attention to that and you think you've counted 140 people on your guest list and you're clearing your minimum, if any of those are kids, those are not going to be counted in that head count. So if you've got 120 adults and 20 kids coming to your wedding, they would not meet the 140 minimum adult count. Therefore, you would be charged for an additional 20 adults on top of the 20 kids that you're paying for separately. So that's important to note and keep in the back of your head, especially when you are making your guest list and ensuring that you are going to meet your minimum requirements. So in this particular contract, they do lay out the time frame. The bride is on site at 3 o'clock. That is what time her event starts. In this contract, they give you 5 hours of reception time. Anything outside of the 5 hours is an additional charge. Depending on whether or not you are hosting your ceremony on site or just your reception on site, you would determine how much time you have prior to your event time to enter the building and be on the premises. This particular bride got married at a church, so she did not have her ceremony on site. If she did have her ceremony on site, she would be allowed to arrive 2.5 hours prior to her ceremony start time. But because her reception started and her set time was 3 o'clock, she was able to enter the building an hour and a half prior. Same goes for the vendors on this particular contract. They do not allow any outside vendors in prior to that same start time that the bride is allowed on site. In addition, any bridal party members or family members. So basically, no one that is outside of working for the venue allowed on the premises until that hour and a half before the 3 p.m. start time. So that's very important to keep in mind, and something you definitely need to be making sure you understand, so that as you sign that contract and you go forward later trying to make plans for all the logistics of everything that needs to happen, that you fully understand what time you're going to have access to that building, especially if you're talking to outside vendors who have all kinds of work and setup to do prior to your event beginning, and they may require 5 or 6 hours for setup, and you may only be working with an hour and a half. So you really need to make sure that you're checking those details closely when you're reading your contracts. This particular venue also has a set teardown time. This one only gives you a 30-minute teardown time, which is a very challenging thing to do at the end of a wedding, especially when you have lots of stuff that you're trying to get out of the building, say goodbye to your guests. It's been a long day. So just gathering those items and trying to get packed up and out of the building is somewhat of a challenge. So having only 30 minutes to be able to do that, you definitely want to have a great game plan intact so that you can ensure you do that. Otherwise, you would have to purchase additional hours in order to have more time for that tear down and clean out. Okay, so moving on down, and again, a lot of this information is very standard and things that should be in almost every contract. It's just stuff that I would like to point out to you that you do need to be careful. You are understanding what it means as you're moving forward and making plans outside of whatever's happening in the venue. If you are, again, making plans with your bridal party or friends or neighbors or whoever to help you out on your wedding day, that you understand the parameters that you have to work within on your particular contract. This particular contract, the 5-hour reception includes 4.5 hours of bar service. The last 30 minutes is last call, and that's when the bar shuts down. So you are getting 4.5 hours for beverages in your 5-hour reception. Okay. This particular venue also owns their liquor license. In the state of Ohio, there's a lot of rules against liquor being brought into facilities that have licenses. There's different types of licenses. It's going to vary state to state. Obviously, everyone has their own laws and should abide by those, of course. Make sure you're reading the contracts and understand. What is so important about not bringing alcohol onto the premises is, in Ohio anyways, the facility is risking losing their liquor license, which is a lot of times where the bread and butter is being made. And so if you are bringing liquor in and that is, they get caught, they get fined, they get in trouble, they risk losing their license, which makes their business very difficult going forward because they are unable to provide alcohol to future weddings. So keep that in mind. Be respectful when you do have a contract that states that it is typical that you've got some groomsmen or other people that want to bring some alcohol in and celebrate as they're getting ready. It's just very important that if you are the bride or couple at a particular venue that has that rule, that your bridal party and your guests understand that no outside alcohol can come in. And the reason for that is because you're the one that's going to be on the hook. You're the one signing the contract. You are just as responsible as any of the people that are bringing it in. This particular scenario, they do require a $450 deposit that is refunded after your wedding, provided that none of the rules are broken and that there's no damage to their building. In this particular instance, that $450 deposit would be forfeited if anyone at all brings alcohol onto the premises of their property. And no liquor in this particular scenario is allowed in their bridal or groom suites. They do not serve shots. That, again, is something that I see very often at weddings. Most wedding venues will not serve shots to your guests. They reserve the right to remove people off the property if they are not abiding by those guidelines. And they also have the right to shut down the bars without refund if they do find that people are not abiding by those rules. So do keep that in mind. It can be something, it can be a damper on your wedding day if you've got some unruly guests or groomsmen who decide that they are going to challenge those guidelines. Okay, so moving on to the other page here. This particular one, like I said, there is a security deposit of $450 that is required. And it, again, just covers any damage that's outside of normal wear and tear. This is pretty standard across the industry. It kind of helps guarantee that if those damages are made, that they have some kind of recourse in order to collect and get that taken care of. Let's see here. So moving down, this one just spells out who is going to be on the premises for their wedding. So anybody from event managers, caterers, and bar staff. All right, so this is the one that is probably the biggest piece of the contract that you need to pay attention to. And this is where a lot of people miss and are shocked when they get to the end of their event and they start seeing the final bills and all the things that have been added to it. In this particular venue, outside rental equipment is handled by the venue only. So if you wanted to go rent a particular item that you saw somewhere and you would like that at your wedding, they would be the ones to rent it on your behalf, and that would get added to your bill with your venue. In this particular scenario, all rental, including but not limited to props, decor, linens, tents, chairs, chair covers, convection ovens, warmers, etc., must be arranged and ordered by the venue. Outsourced rentals will be procured by them and will incur a 20% service fee. So the piece of that that's important to think about is that they are bringing that stuff in on your behalf, which is great, and it takes the work off of you. However, you're paying a pretty high premium in order to have that service provided. So a lot of times those venues will upcharge on the rate for handling those details, which I always tell clients, no matter what, they're taking care of all of the ordering. They are setting it up. They're handling the delivery and the pickup of those items, and they're assuming whatever damage may or may not happen during the event. Typically, most places will upcharge around 20% of whatever the rate is that you see online or get quoted on your own independently. This particular venue upcharges, but on top of the upcharge, there's the service fee. So it's almost a double upcharge, if you will, and it can be pretty hefty. So it is 20% on top of the rental rate. And again, when we look at the spreadsheet, that is a pretty hefty number at the end of the day, depending on how many things you want to add to your wedding package. So that is just something, when you are reading contracts and before you are signing contracts and giving deposits, that you fully understand the consequence of, because it is a line item that is not included in your budget and will need to be factored in as you are going through the planning process. So please make sure you are reading those details in your contracts and fully understand what that means. Okay, so moving along, most things are pretty standard in this particular scenario if you opt to have a band brought in as entertainment. This particular venue includes a DJ. They have a house DJ that comes with their venue. You can still elect to bring in your band if you would like to have a band play. they do charge an additional $300 fee in order to accommodate additional time for the band to set up. So that is something to also ensure you're factoring into your budget if that's a consideration when you are making these arrangements. Again, little things don't seem like big deals until lots of little things start to add up. $300 here, $500 there, $800 here. It may not seem like a lot to some people, but when you tally all those up, it adds up to thousands of dollars. This particular paragraph is pretty standard, but not everybody pays attention to it. When I talk about coordinators that come with your venue, when people talk to me and ask me if they feel like they need to have additional coordinators or staff, or tell me they don't need to have additional coordinators or staff because their coordinator comes with the venue, and then they tell me all these lovely ideas and things that they're planning to do at the setup of their wedding, I inform them that when it comes to the venue and the coordinator that comes with the venue, the only responsibility that coordinator contractually has is ensuring that everything on their end is accounted for. All their I's are dotted and all their T's are crossed. Now, they will always tell you they're happy to help you with this. They're happy to help you with that. They'll put your place cards out for you. They'll set up certain things. At the end of the day, if something goes awry and time becomes short, if there's some issue in the venue that they have to tend to, the only contractual obligation that they have is whatever is spelled out in their contract. So if place cards being set up is not spelled out in their contract, and they run out of time because they're doing other things that are needed on their end, you have no place cards and you have no recourse. So this particular contract lays that out as I would expect it to, because my guess is that they've probably had in the past a bride that showed up with 500 boxes from Amazon with all kinds of little trinket things inside that needed to be unwrapped, placed on the tables individually on top of people's plates or napkins or whatever they had, that required an extensive amount of time to set up. And that happens every single day. I see it all the time. It's amazing to me the amount of people that show up with box loads of things and they haven't even opened it, and they've been sitting in their spare bedroom for 6 months, which is another subject we'll talk about. But in this particular scenario, my guess is that they've had a number of brides that have shown up with this scenario, and they've run out of time to get all these things that the bride showed up with and to get it all set up to the bride's liking and her standard and her expectation. And so to cover themselves, they now have to spell this out in the contract, because they're going to have some people complaining when that stuff doesn't get done. So the company is not required to set up all client or outside vendor provided items, including but not limited to floral or fabric arrangements, backdrops, band or DJ equipment, elaborate cookie or candy tables, unassembled favors, or decor. If teardown will take more than 30 minutes beyond the departure time, some minimal teardown might begin prior to the reception in time. If there is an item in question, you must arrange prior to the scheduled event date to have supplied items set up with your provided time rental of the facility. This to me is telling me that there are multiple brides through the years that have showed up to their facility with truckloads of things that they expected their coordinators to put out that was completely unreasonable, and they didn't have enough time, and they had to deal with those issues after the fact. So now they're happy to go ahead and put some of those things out that you want, but to a certain degree and limit. And all brides should keep that in mind If you are one of those brides that has truckloads full of stuff that you insist having at your wedding and all these little details that need to be done, then yes, I would highly suggest at that point that you either invest in a day of person, setup person that's going to come and do all those details for you, or get a crew of people together that are going to do all the unwrapping and prep work prior to bringing that stuff at the facility. So all the facility has to do is open a box, put it out real quick, and be done. Okay, again, we've talked about this back when we talked about venue touring. This is spelled out and not a surprise by any means, and pretty much a standard at almost every venue at this point. No glitter of any kind is permitted on the property inside or outside, and that is in all caps. Why? Because people skip it over, and every single wedding, people show up and there's something with glitter on it. And so they're sad to find out that they're not able to use it. And so in this particular scenario, they made it pretty obvious so that you can't miss it. In fact, if you do show up with glitter on their premises, you automatically forfeit your security deposit of $450. So again, read those details before you start making those plans, because you will waste a lot of money on stuff that will not be usable. No confetti is permitted. Again, very, very common. It is a pain in the rear end to clean up. And so they are just not even messing with it. In the state of Ohio, if you have seen send-off lanterns where you light some paper on fire and send it up into the air, those are prohibited in Ohio. They are prohibited in Ohio, sorry. And so they should be prohibited in just about everywhere, because they are a fire hazard, especially if you've got trees with dry leaves, power lines. I've seen them get stuck underneath cars. There's all sorts of things. Those were a living nightmare for some planners for a few years, and now they seem to be gone. Silk petals, pretty common, are not permitted outside, and reason for that is because they are not natural. The wind, other weather could blow them away, and they are not able to be cleaned up. So fresh petals are permitted outside, but not silks. Helium balloons are not allowed inside the venue. Birdseed, rice, bubbles, and sparklers are permitted with permission and consent from the venue. Sparkler send-offs must be communicated. There are all kinds of details on what is allowed and not allowed. That is pretty standard as well. Again, no surprise here. There are no push pins, staples, tape, adhesive of any type for hanging decorations inside or outside. So that is something to keep in mind when you have grandiose plans of all these things that you want to do. How are you going to make that happen without affixing them to any of the fixtures? And that is standard in pretty much every venue, just because there's too many different ideas and a lot of repair work that would be required in order to fix all those marks on walls every single wedding. This particular venue does have a noise ordinance in its area that it's located in, and so no music can be outside the facility after 11 p.m. That is pretty standard as well, depending on the location of your facility. So this one is a little bit interesting, and I do not see this at every venue. I'm mainly seeing it here in this scenario. The company has the right to use or retain all photographs and video taken of events. The videos and the photos may be used for promotional purposes as they feel necessary. So they do reach out to the photographer and videographer to receive those photos, and they do have those people, as they enter their building, sign that they have the right to do so. Photographers and videographers are not permitted in the building prior to the bride arrival, which is the contracted time. So that can make it a little bit difficult depending on the time frame of everything taking place and what photos the bride would like to have. But it's not out of the ordinary. So it's just, again, something to consider when you're putting your timeline together and you're talking to all your vendors and you're trying to figure out where you're going to be, what you're going to be doing, and what photos you would like to have done. Okay, pretty standard throughout the contract. Removal of items that are left behind is not their responsibility. They'll be thrown away. Nothing surprising here. All kinds of risks and whatnot, standard everywhere. Cancellation policy. This is something you just need to read no matter where you're at, no matter what vendor you're working with. You need to know what will happen and what are you responsible for if by chance you decide to cancel your wedding for any reason. With the recent pandemic issues during COVID, a lot of cancellation policies were coming to light just because of the controversies with all the different restrictions that were being put into place amongst different states and local areas. So a lot of weddings were affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, and there was lots of different opinions across the board and a lot of loosey-goosey contracts that ended up really getting attorneys involved to determine if some of them were even legal and what their rights were given the pandemic, because no one had ever faced that or thought of that before, and it was all new territory for everyone. And unfortunately, there was a lot of disagreements in the industry on how things should be handled. So those particular scenarios were all brought to light, and many people have updated their cancellation policy to now reflect any possible scenario like that going forward. In this particular scenario, they do require a 180-day written notice of cancellation prior to the event date. So the 180 days is important to keep in mind. Any money that has been paid up to that date of the cancellation becomes their money. So anything you've already paid up until that 180 days notice is no longer your money, and it will be theirs. If the written notice of cancellation is not received at least 180 days prior to the event date, this is important to understand. Any remaining balance due pursuant to the agreement is immediately due to the company in full at time of the cancellation. So if you're 181 days, 182 days, 90 days, whatever it is, and you decide to cancel for whatever reason, you are still responsible for the full amount that you contracted as if you were moving forward with your wedding day. That is something that everyone needs to understand and keep in mind when they're moving forward, because not everyone realizes that. A lot of people think they can just walk away and whatever they paid, they lose, or they're going to get a refund and only lose their deposit. But every contract is different and every cancellation policy is different. And if that is their cancellation policy and you have signed and agreed that, that is what your responsibility is going to be. And it's important to understand that. In this particular scenario, postponement has been put in here and spelled out, which I believe a lot of times prior to COVID, not all the contracts had it spelled out on their policy because it was not something that happened on a frequent basis as it was happening during COVID periods. In the event of postponement, management may determine your new event date, which may be held within 1 year of the date of postponement, not the date of your event scheduled, but the date you postpone. So if your date was originally June 1st and you decide on February 1st that you would like to postpone that June 1st date, you have to have your wedding within that year of that February 1st date, not the year of the original June 1st date. That's important to know, because if you're thinking you're going to push it out a year, you're really not pushing it out a year. You're only pushing it out a couple months, because you have to work within the year of the postponement date. So that is something to make sure you understand and note if by chance something were to happen. And that's for any reason, whether it's an illness, whether it's, a pandemic, whether it's just a financial reason that you need to postpone, whatever it is, there's lots of reasons why people postpone. It's important to keep that information at hand. And again, it is based upon the availability of a date being available and the management's agreement on that. Let's see here, more pretty standard options. There are additional fees in this that are laid out if you do postpone. It's minimal, but again, it's something to just remember because it just keeps adding up. Okay, so it spells out all of their vendors that are included and whatnot. In this particular scenario, this venue provides floral centerpieces for the guest tables. So something that's important to note, if you think all your flowers are included, in this particular scenario, no ceremony flowers are included, no bridal bouquets are included, no head table flowers, no other ancillary tables are going to be included with florals. So it truly is only for guest tables. And it's also important to note that this venue only accounts for tables for every 10 guests. So if you are doing your place cards and your seating chart and you have a table where you can only put 8 people based on the dynamics of those guests, and you end up with 2 people in overflow, and then of course you're not going to seat just 2 people at a table, you are now going to rearrange a couple tables and maybe add a table or 2 to your floor plan. There is an additional charge to do that because it's outside of the allotted amount of tables based on your guest count. So if you have 140 guests at your wedding, they're going to give you 14 tables. And those 14 tables are going to include your linens and your centerpiece and all the accoutrements that go on top. If you decide to add a 15th table, that's going to cost you. It's going to cost you an extra centerpiece, an extra linen, and all the tableware that goes on there. So something to keep in mind when you are looking through. Again, it's little things like that that add up and can make your budget go way over what the expected costs were. Okay, so that is pretty much for this particular contract, the things that I wanted to point out. Here is one last thing on the last page here. This is when it relates to increasing on pricing. And after COVID kind of settled down and all the weddings were back in full force, the next thing that really hit the industry was the increase in the supply chain. There were so many issues with supply chains, and there still is, with getting enough workers to be able to produce enough product for demand. And so a lot of costs went up, food costs especially. And so many of the brides who had previous contracts, whether it be 2020 or 2021 and even 2022, were finding that they were getting hit with price increases on the contracts that they'd already signed, only because the venues and the caterers and the florists and all the wedding industry professionals were also getting hit with those increased costs, and it was beyond their control. And so many of those vendors had to go back, despite the contracts that they had, and increase prices. Again, there were so many things that the industry really learned from during COVID. And so contracts have really changed and been buttoned up in order to protect themselves against all those scenarios. So in this particular situation, this contract states that pricing is subject to an increase of up to 10%. Prices can increase up to 90 days before the client's event due to catastrophic events like war, famine, and other disasters. Other disasters could be anything: tornadoes, hurricanes, forest fires, you name it. So it's kind of an open-ended scenario here. But what's risky is that you won't know until the last 90 days whether or not there's going to be a price increase. So 10% doesn't sound like a lot, but on a high invoice, it could be quite a bit. So just something, again, to keep in the back of your mind. Perhaps just put a little reserve in the budget for scenarios like this, so that way, if something unexpected does come up in this particular scenario, you are covered and don't find yourself in a predicament. So everything else in this contract is pretty cut and dry and standard. None of these are completely out of the ordinary or red flags or anything like that. Really, what I just wanted to point it out is that this is an actual contract from an actual venue, from an actual wedding that just took place in 2023, July to be exact. And so this is such a recent contract and a great one to point out all those things that you should be looking for as your venue shopping and comparing quotes and comparing pricing and comparing and understanding the contracts, again, mainly so that you're prepared, not caught off guard, understand your obligations and responsibilities as the bride and the couple going into the venue, and understanding what the venue is providing you and what you're paying for. That is why I'm doing this. I hope to do this with almost every type of vendor, just so that you can truly, again, understand all those different categories and what to be expecting, looking out for, and be able to plan for, so that you have more of a stress-free wedding. So this was just supposed to be a helpful video for you to see an actual true wedding and a sample contract, not only the wording of the contract, but the line items of that contract. So I will hopefully have some additional scenarios like this when it comes to other categories, just to share with you. If people are willing to give me that information, then I am going to share that with you, just so that you can, again, see a true real wedding and all the little pieces and parts of it, and what to expect and understand when it comes to getting quotes and contracts on your end. So if this is helpful for you, keep watching, and I'll see you in the next video.